morning, everyone. I am Cindineri Mestrera, and in behalf of my groupmates, I am the one who will be discussing all about the annotation of Sucesos de las Islas, Filipinas. But before we're going to start our discussion, let's watch first the video presentation in relation to our topic for today.
I wrote this book to chronicle the deeds achieved by the Spaniards, to document the events of this country, the Philippines. Through this, I share my experiences and observations, and of others. May this book be a window to the past for future generations and for them to learn from. Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas.
Let's begin to our discussion all about Rizal's annotation of Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas. But before we're going to our discussion, let's have first the objective. First is to analyze Rizal's idea on how to rewrite Philippine history. Second is to compare and contrast Rizal and Morga's different point of views about Filipinos and to Philippine culture. So in this discussion, we can easily distinguish the different views about Filipinos and Philippine culture of Rizal and Morga. So let's proceed to annotation. When you hear the word annotation, what comes from your mind? So annotation, it is an extra information associated with particular point in a document or other piece of information. So, on the other hand, annotation is an explanatory note or a comment. So that is all for annotation. So next is Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas. So sucesos is a Spanish word, but then in English, we can call it an event. Las Islas Filipinas means the Philippine island in English and was named in honor of King Philip II of Spain. So, it means to say that Las Islas Filipinas is in Spanish, right? And then in English, it is the Philippine island. And sucesos means the work of an honest observer. When we say honest observer, it is a work with full of honesty, a versatile bureaucrat, which typically says an organization that is complex with multi-layered system and processes. And it is also to maintain uniformity and control within an organization, and who knew the workings of the administration from the inside. So that is for Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas. So this book is one of the important works of the Philippines about the colonization of Spain, who was published by Antonio de Morga in Mexico in 1609. This book also explained the political, social, and economical aspect of a colonizer and a colonized country. The book is based on the experience and observation of Antonio de Morga. So it means that this book is true to life story. And yes, of course, because it comes from the experience and observation of Morga. And this book also annotated by Jose Rizal with a prologue by Dr. Ferdinand Blumentritt. So annotated means that to give readers extra information that advance the plot, and states there that with a prologue of Dr. Ferdinand Blumentritt, which means to say that Dr. Blumentritt gave an extra information about the Sucesos de las Islas. Next is the work consists of 8 chapters. So these are the 8 chapters. First, of the first discoveries of the Eastern Island, of the government of Dr. Francisco de Sande, of the government of Don Gonzalo Ronquelo de Pialosa. Fourth, of the government of Dr. Santiago de Vera. Fifth, of the government of Comis Pires das Marias. Sixth, of the government of Don Francisco Tello. Seventh, of the government of Don Pedro de Acuella. And last is an account of the Philippine island. So, these are the 8 chapters that the work consists of. And now, let's move on to Antonio de Morga, who published the book which is the Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas in Mexico in 1609. So Antonio de Morga is a Spanish lawyer and a government official during the 17th century. Morga is an historical anthropologist. He is the author of Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas. He wrote the first lay formal history of the Philippines conquest by Spain. And also, he is a doctorate in canon and in civil law. So these are some personal information all about Antonio de Morga. Next is, let's proceed to the purpose of Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas. So Morga on 1609 wrote that the purpose for writing Sucesos was he could chronicle the deeds achieved by our Spaniards, the discovery, conquest, and conversion of the Philippines Mast Island, as well as various fortunes that they have from time to time in the great kingdoms and among the pagan people surrounding the island. So, Morga had a great purpose why he published the Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas. The goal also is to document the events during the Spanish colonial period of the Philippines, and then it is also include Filipino tradition, manners, and also religion. So therefore, this book was so interesting. So next is let's move on to what, how, and why of Dr. Jose Rizal. So first to be tackled is the what. What led Jose Rizal to Morga's work? Rizal was an earnest seeker of thought, and this marked him as a historian. He had a burning desire to know exactly the condition of the Philippines when the Spaniards came ashore on the island. His theory was that the country was economically self-sufficient and prosperous. Entertained the idea that it had a lively and vigorous community, and he believed the conquest of the Spaniards contributed in part of the decline of the Philippines' rich traditions and culture. And he then also decided to undertake the annotation of Antonio de Morga Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas, and his personal friendship with Ferdinand Blumentritt provided the inspiration for doing a new edition for Morga's Sucesos. He devoting 4 months research and writing an opus ire to get his manuscript published in Paris in January 1890. So, in general, what led Jose Rizal lead to Morga's work is Jose Rizal explains on his introduction to the Morga that he got the inspiration while he was working on the Noli, that is by depicting the acute situation of the Philippines, and the very influence of the Noli convinced him that it was necessary to know the past fairly in order to understand the present. So that is what led Jose Rizal annotated to Morga's work. And now let's move on to why. Why Jose Rizal chose Morga's work? Rizal felt to be more objective than the religious writers whose account including many miracle stories. And Morga compared to religious chronicles was more sympathetic to the Indians, and finally Morga was not only an eyewitness but a major actor in the event, and he narrates. And Rizal's second consideration for the choice of Morga's book was that it was the only civil as opposed to religious or ecclesiastical history of the Philippines written during the colonial period. And the third consideration for the choice of Morga was Rizal's opinion that the secular account was more objective, more trustworthy than was written by the religious missionaries, which were liberally sprinkled with tales of miracles and apparitions. The fourth consideration of Rizal's choice by the Morga was that it was appeared more sympathetic, at least it parts to the Indians. And in contrast to the prayer account, many of which were biased or downright choices in tone and true interpretation. And the fifth and last consideration was that Morga was an eyewitness, and therefore a primary source of the Philippines and its people at that point of the first contact with Spain. So that is why Jose Rizal chose Morga's work, because of what did the book tells or what is in the inside. And Rizal's annotation invent was not only to provide the Filipino people their early history, a brief Spanish history, but to prevent to them their own authentic culture and identity. So that is why Jose Rizal chose Morga's work. And now let's move on to how. How did Jose Rizal know about Morga's work? So Rizal found the book while he was in London at the British Museum reading room. He had copied the whole 351 pages of the book. So imagine, he only used his hand to write or to annotate the Morga's book for over 351 pages and annotated every chapter, and it was the first historical work of the Philippines by a Filipino, and it is the first history written from the point of view for the colonized, not the colonizer. So that is the what, how, why of Dr. Jose Rizal. But in addition of that, why Rizal annotated the Book of Morga is that He had been overthinking the idea of the Filipino, not as a people who were equal to the Spanish colonizer, but a people with a unique civilization that was destroyed by colonization. And Rizal found answer to his idea in Morga's book, and it was the work that he decided to reprint his annotation. And the book began working on London and completing in Paris in 1890. So that could be all for the what, how, and why. So next is let's move on to Rizal's annotation. First is a straightforward historical annotations where Rizal amplifies or correct the original. So the first Rizal annotation is he correct the original. The second one is the annotation which the historical base reflect his strong anti-clerical bias. So he used his strong he reflects his strong anti-clerical bias. And the Rizal's purpose in annotating the Morga's work is to awaken the consciousness of the Filipinos regarding their glorious ways of the past, to correct what has been distorted about the Philippines due to Spanish conquest. So, when we say distorted, it is to correct the false about the Philippines during the Spaniards' conquest, and to prove that the Filipinos are civilized or advanced even before the coming of the Spaniards. So Rizal's purpose why he annotate Morga's work is having an advanced or human culture, society, or polite or well-bred, even before the coming of the Spaniards. The people of the Philippines had a culture of their own before the coming of the Spaniards. So just like what I have said earlier, the people of the pre-Hispanic Philippines are advanced and have a high literacy rate, self-sufficient, and have a smooth foreign relations. Filipinos were decimated, demoralized, exploited, and joined by the Spanish colonization. And the present state, the Philippines, was not necessarily superior to its past. And in this annotation, he included the colonial history of the Philippines, being in prolonged period of suffering that many people have been subjected to. And the Philippines was depopulated, impoverished, and retorted, and surrounded by metaphor, with no confidence in their past, still without faith in her present, and without faltering hope in the future. So Rizal had a great purpose why he annotated the Morga's book, which is the Sucesos Islas de los Pinos, because he provide us the original or the genuine as the genuine Filipino one. So that is for Rizal's annotation. So let's move on to Ferdinand Blumentritt prologue to Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas. So when we say prologue, it is an extra information. So therefore, Dr. Blumentritt gave an extra information to the book, which is the Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas. Dr. Ferdinand, he wrote it in Spanish, even though German in his native language. So imagine. And he encouraged Rizal to write about the Philippines' pre-colonial history. And he praised Rizal's work as a scholarly and well thought out, and noted that the book is so rare that very few libraries have it and guarded it like a treasure. So this book was so treasured. And also, Dr. Blumentritt became one of Rizal's closest confidants, even they meet only once. So imagine, they only meet once, and then it is what they are so close to each other. So that is what their friends are going. But before that, Blumentritt gave criticized Rizal explanation on two accounts. He noticed that Rizal had committed the mistake of many modern historians who judge events in the past. He said that Rizal should not condemn Catholicism, even though they did not do any effort to suppress school for reform. He should just keep the critic about religious orders in the Philippines. So that is what Dr. Blumentritt criticized Rizal's explanation on the two accounts. The Sucesos, as annotated by Rizal, appeared for the first time in the Philippines 68 years later when a publisher in Manila published the new work in 1958 to contribute his speed to the national effort to honor Rizal, and the present work is the sixth volume on the series of writings of a Jose Rizal, which is Jose Rizal National Centennial Commission has not published in commemoration of his birth. So that is what all about the Sucesos. Okay, so since we are done discussing all about the annotation of Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas of Morgas by Jose Rizal, so now we can easily differentiate or distinguish the similarities and differences between Rizal and Morgas' annotation of the book. So first is, let's tackle the government. As expected, Morga was critical of the system of government, which he said barely existed because there were no powerful figure that ruled over my real communities, most of them coastal, each with its own set of leaders. So that is for Morga. While for Rizal, he argued that it was better that way. Why should the communities be beholden to one ruler who did not evenly among them and do not familiar with their needs and problems? How could he had dispute, meet justice, implement policies if he did not even know about it? So that is for Rizal. At in daily living, Morga said that cotton was grown extensively in naturally owned island with the native soil as trade in the woven and algar foreign merchants. While Jose Rizal, he clarified Morga must have meant sinamay which was woven and from abaca thread that comes from the trunk, not the leaves. And in natives, Morga was found fascinated the social organization of the who described the origins of the differences for the villages of social classes, upward and probability inheritance, opposition, and titledness, and that is what Morgas meant for native. While Rizal, he emphasizes that native women, unlike the European counterparts, was lost their noble titles, and in marriage, it was the groom who gave the vow parents or dowry because they were losing a precious daughter. And now we have here a Venn diagram about the similarities and differences of Rizal and Morga's view on Filipino culture. So Morga and Rizal, they are government. But Morga's view is he was critical of the system of government which he said barely existed because there were no powerful figures that ruled over myriad communities, most of them coastal each own set of leaders. While Rizal's view, he thought that it was better that way and that there's no need for the communities to be beholden to one ruler who did not even live among them and was not familiar with their needs and problems. So, I hope that you had learned some enough knowledge all about the results annotation of Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas, and you can easily distinguish the similarities and differences of Morga's work and Rizal's annotation. So that would be all for today's discussion. But before we enter our discussion, Jose Rizal gave a last quote to the presentation. He said that to foretell the destiny of a nation, it is necessary to open the book that deal of her past. So based on our understanding, this quote emphasizes about predicting the past. And that would be all for this discussion. Thank you, and I hope you've learned something.